Okay.
Hi, welcome. How relevant is this year's conference, do you think, to the higher education system and the direction that the redesign of higher education is taking?
I think that it is right on the mark by thinking about the transformation that education needs to go through, bring together leaders to think about how they can change their institutions and their educational programs in order to meet the needs both of the students and of society that we're graduating the students to go out and be productive in.
Okay. So, what kinds of solutions, and along with that, what sort of problems do you think higher education will have to, for, for the problems to look at and for the solutions to provide for future graduates?
One of the things that I find fascinating about the conversation that we're having right now is that there's a lot of uncertainty about the nature of the economy going forward. You know, a lot of the discussion, just to pick an example of AI and how it's going to disrupt um, the entire economy and jobs will be squeezed out. And how do you prepare students when their jobs are going to change 6 or 8 times over the course of their careers? And that leads to discussions of, well, you have to teach them how to learn, and you have to prepare them with soft skills and keep them flexible, and you ought to emphasize perhaps more of the liberal arts in the education of the students. So that's the nature of the conversation. And yet in the United States, we've had for a long time the Gen Eds, the general education program that we require all students to go through. At my university, at the University of Buffalo, we recently redesigned our entire general education program, which, you know, we have 12,000 students a semester taking gen ed courses. Okay, we're at scale. So it was a big undertaking. And the concept that we worked on is that we would like it to be the core. You take those courses and we basically certify that you're an educated individual, and then you specialize and get a major. And it represents the UB curriculum, we call it, represents about a third of the credit hours a student has to take in order to get a degree. And so we think of that as the center, and then you specialize to get deep domain knowledge somewhere else. And so you get a degree in chemistry, you get a degree in English or philosophy or anthropology or mechanical engineering. But you have this core education. And is it the right way to go would be the question. Are our students successful? Will they be successful given the disruptions we're having in the economy? And I argue yes. That these are, in order to get into the university, you meet most of the criteria in terms of just your mental acuity and curiosity and capability, and then we provide that core education. Now the balance could shift if you could shrink the deep domain knowledge and expand the general education, for example. You could do that, and I don't claim that it's precisely correct, but that model of a core broad liberal arts, a very American tradition, liberal arts education, and then deep domain knowledge that sort of gets you your first job is very important. I also think the deep domain knowledge provides you with a way of thinking. It teaches you an approach to solving problems that is different. So an individual trained in history, spent a lot of time working with historians, will approach a problem later in life differently than somebody who's been trained as an engineer. And the details of what they learned in history or in engineering, nobody remembers them, right? I mean, the world does move on. Everybody knows that. But what you have picked up is the capacity to think like an engineer, to think like a historian. And as a society, basically, we think we need that diversity of approach to problems in order to make progress. And so somehow that broad education that prepares you to be just a citizen of the world and understand basic skills, but also history and narrative and language and culture and globalization and diversity. So all students have that. And then you need some science in there, and you probably need some IT in there to just because of the world we live in. But then that broad education supplemented with deep domain knowledge, I don't think we have a better model. And I also think it's worked pretty well. My career, I've been in academics, but I've had 4 or 5 different jobs, and I wasn't trained for almost all of them. Okay, and so I don't know that oh my God, they're going to go through 6 jobs, our graduates. I don't know that that's different than what it has been for a long time. It's just that we do have a sense that something dramatic is going to happen as we shift into whatever the future is. The digital revolution continues to evolve. I think one of the big problems in getting universities to balance this and to address those questions actually comes about in how we train the faculty. So our faculty are educated, they have terminal degrees, most of them will be PhDs, and most of the PhD is focused on working on your creativity, working on your ability to take complex issues and resolve them into questions and then answer those questions. So it's about scholarship, it's about creativity, and we hire at UB, and it sounds like at NU, a lot of the hiring is based on the capacity to be creative, the capacity to add scholarship in your discipline. And society wants that, right? A knowledge-based, innovative economy wants ideas and technologies and discoveries, and they turn to universities as the source of that. Right, so we hire PhDs who know all about their discipline. I like to say that they've learned more and more about less and less till they know everything about nothing. Okay, but that's what it takes to advance a particular discipline, let's say. And it's nice if that deep knowledge, if you can collaborate, and those collaborations as teams might be able to solve bigger problems. But right now we incentivize faculty to be really good at disciplines and at research. And because that's what we value, what we hire on the basis of, what we tenure on the basis of, that's what faculty do. And now we're asking them, well, why don't you redo the curriculum? Excuse me, the curriculum? What's that? Right? It isn't that faculty don't like to teach, it's just that they really aren't incentivized to be creative and think about what do the future grads need? How could I reduce the number of required credit hours in physics or in philosophy in order to provide more space for the students to learn these more general pieces so they can be broader in their thinking, learn the soft skills, learn the leadership skills, that sort of things, right? That sort of creativity, it isn't taught, it isn't incentivized, and so faculty aren't trained to think that way. And that's a barrier. How are we going to change? As an administrator, I don't control the curriculum. The faculty control the curriculum. They control the way material is taught. They control the content of the course. They control the assessments. They control how courses are stacked into credentials that we'll call degrees. And so we can poke and prod, but if they don't want change, they won't, and they haven't. And so this is a challenge on how do we prepare faculty so they can be effective in the classroom. Right? They have the knowledge, they have the interest in teaching the next generation, but if you want to do blended classes, the faculty in their 40s, they didn't grow up in the digital world. Right? And so they don't understand the students that's coming at them, where the student of today gathers knowledge, socializes, learns online, staring at a screen. All right? Faculty didn't learn that way. They grew up like me. You blow off your notes and then you go to the board and you're writing with chalk on the board, right? And that's how I was taught to teach. And I wasn't really taught to teach. I was exposed to teachers. But nobody taught me how to transfer knowledge efficiently, rapidly, and well. Right? And so I think one of the challenges we face is how to prepare the professors, how to jump from what we have to what we imagine a future-ready education might be. Because to get there, I mean, I'm educating PhDs right now at UB, right? So a lot of PhDs, but I'm training them the way they were trained 30 years ago. Exact same courses, content, new ideas that they're studying, but nothing's changed. And they're going to go off and get faculty positions. What are they going to know about blended teaching, about flipped classrooms, about digital learning? We aren't teaching them any of that. So it's only if they pick it up along the way. So I think one of the real hurdles that we have in thinking about changing the curriculum is how we have to restructure the education of the professoriate, and how we have to incentivize that professoriate. And I think that will give rise to big changes in higher education.
Well, I had another official question from
Okay.
the press office to ask, but actually along with that I was going to ask you, so what traditions of academia, I mean, we are very traditional in our own way, despite all the creativity you mentioned. But we are very set on our traditions, as you mentioned. We have teach the same way we did programs, the same way that we did 30 years ago. What kind of administrative, academic traditions will we have to change in order to change how we educate the professoriate?
I think that for a research university, which is what NU or UB wish to be, that we'll have to figure out how to incentivize teaching more. And we have to value that role more and support the faculty in that, because we ask the faculty to be creative and do research, and we ask them to teach well. And and we ask them to do tech at the same time. So how do you build support structures around that? And so I think that will require building new infrastructure at universities, such as your office and what you do, in order to get faculty over the barrier so they can be successful in all of those ways. So I think that's some of the administrative pieces that we're struggling with right now. And the other piece that we as an industry or as an institution or a series of institutions in higher ed have to work on is sort of academic hubris. That those that can do, those that can't teach, and those that can't teach become administrators. Okay, and so what you're trying to do, of course, is scholarship and research, and therefore we talk about what is your workload, and that is tantamount to saying what is your teaching load, right? So that's the workload of a faculty. So what do they really want to do? They want to do research, but that's not work, right? The teaching, so the entire language we have around what we're trying to do in the university makes it seem as if it's a burden to educate the next generation, as opposed to something that is valuable. No, I have to teach because otherwise I can't play in the lab. Right? I can't go to conferences if I don't teach. Right? And how do we change that? And that's, I think, a profound change in the structure of universities and the way we educate the professoriate.
Great. Okay. So out of all of the strategies and solutions and suggestions for future ready graduates that have been discussed at the conference so far, which ones do you think might take hold? Which ones have, some running speed, if you will?
Well, I think the notion that students shouldn't specialize too early is one that is beginning to catch attention and that people are thinking about. And some of that could be due to the different traditions of education. So if you're in Britain, you specialize as an MD, as an undergraduate, and law as undergraduate. So and so when people talk about, well, we have to give students more time not to specialize, it's because we're sort of mixing different educational traditions here at the conference. But is resonating with those here, that a deeper understanding of societies and cultural norms and language and narrative and history, all of those things are very important in advancing society, and that we need to build those into the curriculum somehow. Now, I think from an American perspective, that's sort of been there for a long time as part of our four-year degree, gen eds, that sort of things. But it strikes me that that's more unusual here in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan, so that many of the people in the audience are listening hard to those concepts. And I don't claim the U.S. has it right. It's just that was a tradition that we chose 200 years ago, and so we sort of stuck with it. As you said, we're inherently conservative, okay? And but I do think that even within what we mean by this broad gen eds, even that has to change. So we teach skills. So we teach writing, we teach mathematics, we teach scientific literacy. I mean, those are skills. Well, you better have some IT in there somewhere. You know, that these days so you have to expand that core. And so what are you going to drop in those credit hours, or what are you going to give up in the major if you expand the core credit hours to include IT or computing or whatever we mean in that particular space? And so those are the challenges that we'll face. But I do think what we're seeing here is this concept of the T-shaped individual, where you're broad and you have the soft skills, but you have enough domain knowledge to get your first job, is beginning to, I just feel it in the room and in the conversations that I'm having.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'd love
absolutely.
to talk more about with you. Wonderful. Well, hopefully we're having better weather than before, when you were here before.
No, well, no, it was gorgeous sun, I think,
really?
last
Yeah,
time
now,
I
now
came.
it's worse this time.
Yes.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, I've been many times, so I've seen most weathers.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, ready? Okay. All right, so the first question I'm going to ask you is, how relevant is this year's forum, do you think, to redesigning higher education systems?
Well, it's clearly relevant. I guess I resist a bit the idea of redesigning higher education systems. It sounds a bit totalitarian, and I think higher education systems probably evolve in response, in a rather more organic way, in response to changing pressures and demands and resources and the whole context. So the idea of kind of sitting somewhere above a whole higher education system and redesigning it, I don't feel terribly comfortable about. But it certainly has many contributions which should be informing thinking about higher education, both at the level of leaders within institutions and policymakers, I think.
Okay, so for you, the relevance is more on the administrative levels, in terms of,
Well, no,
academic
I'm really
policies.
more interested in the student experience and teaching and learning in higher education, and what universities are for, really. Again, I resist some of the assumptions of some of the presentations that it's all about employability. I think it's about something much wider. It's about personal growth. It's about learning for its own sake. It's about enriching people's lives and building capacities which will be exercised in all sorts of fora, in civil society, maybe even in the family, and not just about graduates as as kind of components of industrial production. So it's plainly the case that for many graduates, going to university is seen as a route to getting a better job or a better paid job. And I think universities have to be sensitive to that. But I don't think they have to have their whole agenda and the whole curriculum and everything they do by way of generating student experience determined by particularly a narrow view of what the labour market requires. And as I think some of the speakers were pointing out, very many graduates end up in fields other than those in which they graduated anyway. In my own university, in the University of Cambridge, it produces many engineers, but many of them get sucked up by the city. Their talents are regarded as very relevant to the big financial houses and the banks and the insurance companies, where they bring a combination of logical thinking, of pragmatic thinking, and good command of ICT and technology. So just to kind of gear their courses exclusively to what some civil engineering firm might require would be too narrow a conception of where they may or may not end up, I think.
Yeah, so on that line, I actually have other questions that the press office asked me to do, but I'm going to switch a little bit. Just to follow up on that. I'm trying to think. John Stuart Mill, many years ago, over 100 years ago now, when he became president at St. Andrews, said, we all know, nobody really agrees on what the purpose of a university is, but we all agree on what it is not. It is not a place of professional education.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think he was saying, given that he instituted a school of law, that it was necessarily against the idea of having professional education within the university system, but that couldn't be the goal. And so I'm gathering from you that you agree somewhat with his sentiments.
Well, I think once you locate, at one stage, as Pro-Vice Chancellor at University of East Anglia, my responsibility was for the so-called professional schools. So I had education, I had health, I had management, I had law and social work. And we had a lot of discussion about what's the role of the university in relation to professional education. And we accepted very readily that there was a responsibility, particularly in those schools, for preparing people for particular professions. But it's the professional education which I think indicates the particular role of a university, which is that you place professional practice in a much broader cognitive perspective. You expect people to be reflecting, you expect them to see their particular area of social practice in a context of a wider society and the values of that wider society. You expect them to be able to engage critically and questioningly. So there are features which are central, I think, to the mission of a university, which, if you locate professional education in a university, then come to characterize that professional education. So he engaged in professional education in a particular way, with a broad cognitive perspective on that area of professional practice. So I think it is possible to combine the two, more particularly where people are knowingly preparing for a particular profession. I think there are many areas of the work of a university quite legitimately which don't necessarily lead directly to a particular profession. You may want to study ancient literature or archaeology. It doesn't mean to say you're going to be a professional archaeologist or or literary critic, but that's a contribution to a broader education. So I think universities fulfill many different functions, and you don't have to impose a rigid template on all parts of a university saying they have to do the same job.
Okay, so what kind of solutions do you see going forward? So if, first of all, the future is unknowable, right? We don't know what the future professions are going to be or what the hot ones are going to be. We don't necessarily think that we actually have to train narrowly for those views. So what sort of strategies should a university take as they prepare people going out into the future?
Well, I was impressed by something that my Cambridge colleague, who I'd never met until I came here to Nur-Sultan, Susan Roberts, had to say, which actually there are many aspects of the future which are knowable. There are many things we know now. We know about an aging population. We know about the risks to the planet of headlong pursuit of waste and the generation of fossil fuels and all the rest of it. We know that already. We know that across the world we're seeing widening gaps between rich and poor and the threats that represents to stable societies. So those are quite a raft of issues that we do know about, which I think universities, both through their research and teaching, ought to be addressing and addressing in a very practical as well as theoretical way. So that provides a start. In terms of the unknown unknowns, as she was referring to them, I think it's a matter of developing really high-level generic skills and understanding which allow people to interrogate changing circumstances and circumstances which come at them from nowhere, and to have the resources to deal with those both intellectually and, I guess, emotionally, though I suspect it's primarily the job of a university to focus on being able to make sense of things which happen, which you weren't expecting, having strategies for kind of analyzing the problem and coming up with solutions. And these are fairly high-level intellectual competencies, which are exactly the sort of competencies which I think a university should be expected to be cultivating in its students. So it's not, I think you were suggesting, about specific training for specific skills where we don't know what's going to be redundant and what's not, but aiming at a higher level of cognitive operation which has much broader application in unpredictable circumstances. That's what I think universities should be about.
I agree, yeah. Thank you. Oh, that was excellent.
Okay.
My best one.
Они очень активны, не пассивны, и что их также отличает, они не ждут каких-то инструкций, а наоборот сами предлагают уже какие-то новые решения и идеи. И этим они выгодно отличаются от, скажем так, от своих конкурентов, от выпускников других университетов. Также хотела бы отметить, что очень такую тенденцию, что у нас среди выпускников растет число тех молодых людей, которые связывают свою жизнь с социальным предпринимательством. То есть это те молодые люди, которые не ориентированы в первую очередь на финансовую прибыль, но очень хотят внести свой вклад в развитие общества и в развитие его социальный потенциал. И кроме того, развивая социальное предпринимательство, они создают свои собственные компании и уже сами создают новые рабочие места, что также является очень важным. Да, София.
К вопросу о компетенциях и вызовах на примере вашей жизни. Вы работали в совсем другом месте, да, и вдруг поступило такое предложение, такой огромный, грандиозный, огромный проект возглавить в другой стране, да, и поэтому хотелось бы, чтобы не просто там какая-то история, да, вот какие навыки вам пригодились, воспитанные прежней жизнью, а какие пришлось развивать, чтобы, ну, с чего должен начинать человек, который решил ответить на вызов принятия?
So the question from Sofia Bulchke from Russia. So that's the personal questions on competence, personal competence and challenges. So before joining the Nazarbayev University, you worked in the other organization and the other country. So then you lead this university in the other country. So what kind of competences and challenges you already had when you came here, and what kind of competences you had to develop in the process of working here? So, and this is question number one. And number two, so what's your advice? So what kind of competences should a person develop in his life to succeed in different kinds of jobs?
Very good question. Хороший вопрос. I would say that, you know, I used to be in international development, so my passion has always been in international development, and I was also therefore based in Africa and other places, and in the end, international or development work and building a new university, there are certain common elements in there. And that is, it's all about building institutions and building capacity. Now, maybe the different part was, and from that point of view, I think a lot of the skills that I had acquired in my former organization have stood me well here in good stead when I started here. Now, of course, what comes in addition, obviously, is because you're in a new country, you get into a new environment. You're not necessarily, and you know, as before, I used to deal more with government directly. Here, in a way, it's a little bit of a different environment because I am at times inside government, at times outside of government, but also dealing with other parts, and that is in particular the academic community. And some of the skills that I certainly had to develop, because before, from time to time, yes, I did go to universities to deliver lectures, but it is quite a different thing from trying to manage a university. And managing academics is quite a challenge, and managing also a growing administrative body, which is geared towards a totally different national system, and trying to reconcile the international and national. Those were quite some interesting challenges. And in the end, it is learning by doing. I think the most important trait that one has to have, and my advice for anybody would be, first you have to acknowledge that you don't know much. And you have to always be willing to learn, therefore. And at my age, I can surely tell you that the ability that I have to be able to, every day is a learning experience. I learn something new every day. I can certainly state that. And that is a huge privilege. And to do it also with young people on your side is even better. To do it with young people on your side and with young people is even better.
Мистер Кацук говорит, что да, прежняя карьера была связана с международным развитием, и, в принципе, сфера международного развития — это, можно сказать, страсть вообще всей его жизни. Ему доводилось работать в различных регионах, в Африке и в других регионах. Но, в конце концов, на самом деле, между работой в международных организациях и строительством университета есть очень много схожих моментов. В первую очередь, и там мы говорим об институциональном развитии, то есть о развитии основ. Многие навыки, работы, с предыдущих мест работы, они ему, естественно, очень пригодились. Безусловно, когда мистер Кацу приступил к работе в университете, речь шла о работе в новой стране, это была работа уже в новой обстановке, в новой окружающей среде. Ранее он уже пересекался, в принципе, в Казахстане с многими правительственными учреждениями, с правительственными организациями, доводилось работать с их представителями, но сейчас предстояла работа именно непосредственно в академическом сообществе, что, конечно, было очень достаточно новым опытом. Конечно, безусловно, иногда мистер Кацу периодически в своей карьере посещал университеты, читал лекции, но читать лекции, периодически посещать университеты – это одно, а управлять университетом, строить его совершенно другое. Вот. Какой самый главный принцип для себя извлек мистер Кацу? Это то, что обучение невозможно, обучение идет успешно только в процессе, только в практике. То есть в первую очередь ты должен признать, что ты знаешь немного, и то, чего ты знаешь, на самом деле недостаточно. Поэтому нужно учиться каждый день. И как говорит мистер Кацу, я каждый день учусь чему-то новому, и это вот самое важное. Почему ты каждый день узнавать что-то новое. Еще какие-то вопросы?
Ну, если ни у кого нет, то у меня еще есть. Я бы хотела, чтобы вы представили, что я как студент бы потенциально к вам обратилась. И если можно, буквально очень коротко, ну, может быть, даже в 3 словах, скажите, что ценно в вашем дипломе Назарбаев университет? Почему бы мне захотелось поступить в ваш вуз? И сразу тогда второй вопрос я тоже задам. Хотелось бы узнать о студентах из Таджикистана. Для наших читателей было бы интересно узнать о студентах, которые учатся в вашем вузе из нашей республики, насколько они, скажем так, подготовлены, насколько они, может быть, успешны в учебе. Спасибо.
Okay, first, what value Nazarbayev University degree? If you're a candidate, I would say you will have quite a different student life and experience than any other university in the region. Because it is very much certainly a Western style education. The value of the degree probably is more seen in where do our graduates go. What I can certainly report to you is that if you are so inclined and want to continue afterwards for graduate studies, I told you that earlier that half of our students, almost half of our undergraduates continue for the graduate studies, many of them abroad, and they all go to international top universities. So the quality of our instruction is internationally recognized. That's why I think internationally Nazarbayev University is now seen as one of maybe the leader of higher education here. On top of it, our students are exposed from undergraduate studies to research, so they participate in research. Our instruction is all in English, so they already come in pretty fluent in English, but when they graduate, they're even more fluent in English. We put a lot of emphasis on values, so integrity, academic and personal integrity, and merit are some of the cornerstones for us. So when our graduates, when our students graduate, we do hope that they go out into the world with strong values, moral compasses. All this is, in a way, what's embedded in the diploma of Nazarbayev University. So, in a way, we shall see over the years, because we've only got 5 cohorts, how over time their careers will obviously shape themselves up, of our graduates, and how that will start to be reflected in the reputation of a Nazarbayev University diploma, a degree. But so far, I think I'm quite optimistic that we're on the right track. Now as to the second question, we have had a few citizens from Tajikistan and in education, in public policy, at the graduate school level, and I think also in our medical school. They've done very, very well, so we are very proud to also have among our alumni now Tajikistan citizen. We certainly welcome, we actually want more students both from Central Asia, from our neighbors, from the the brethren from the former Soviet Union, but also beyond, be they from China, be they from India, be they Turkey, Europe, Asia. We are open. We desperately want internationalization in terms of our student body, because one thing that we cannot provide our student is this international exposure. Being exposed on a daily basis with colleagues, meaning fellow students who come from different backgrounds, the diversity of views and languages, customs, cultures, and those things are all very much enriching and shaping one's outlook. So we very much welcome international students, so welcome to Tajik students as well as students from all the countries that you represent today.
Это в первую очередь то, что у вас будет абсолютно интересное и не похожее на других студентов других вузов. Это студенческая жизнь и тот опыт, который они приобретут. Потому что Назарбаев университет называется третий по западным вузам в мире. Во-вторых, различаются наши цели и те задачи, которые мы ставим перед нашими студентами. В первую очередь мы зарекомендовали себя лидерами высшего образования в данном регионе. Почему я могу это утверждать? Потому что, как я уже говорила, большая половина наших выпускников предпочитает после окончания программы бакалавриата продолжать свое обучение за рубежом. И когда мы говорим о зарубежных странах, мы говорим именно о топовых вузах мира. То есть они успешно поступают и продолжают обучаться по дальнейшим программам. Кроме того, для нас очень важно то, что мы своих курсов привлекаем к науке, то есть к участию их в научных проектах. Обучение в университете ведется только на английском языке, и это тоже дает им много преимуществ. И кроме того, также я хотела бы отметить, что мы очень ценим развитие студентов навыков и ценностных принципов. Мы говорим сейчас об академической целостности, о меритократии и о моральных ценностях в том числе. То есть мы хотим, чтобы наши выпускники по окончании выходили во внешний мир, уже обладая такими качествами и сильными ценностными качествами, и в том числе моральными, этическими. В принципе, конечно, говорить о том, что можно делать уже такие выводы далеко вперед идущие, пока мы не можем, потому что пока у нас выпустится только 5 выпусков студентов, но я достаточно оптимистично настроен, анализируя, в принципе, качество выпускников этих 5 лет. Если говорить конкретно о вашем вопросе, студентов из Таджикистана, у нас есть несколько студентов. В основном они учатся в наших высших школах, то есть на программах магистратуры или докторантуры. Речь идет о высшей школе образования, высшей школе косметики и, если не ошибаюсь, есть у нас студенты медицинской школы. Хотела бы сказать, что мы очень хотим и открыты абсолютно для стран Центральной Азии, для наших соседей, для соседних стран, для стран постсоветского пространства, а также и других государств, то есть мы не ограничены и к Китаю, Турции, к Индии, к азиатским странам, европейским. Мы открыты, и сейчас это очень большая задача для нашего университета. Мы очень хотим повысить процент интернационализации наших студентов, потому что мы бы хотели, чтобы у наших студентов был очень хороший опыт именно вот культурного обмена и культурного сотрудничества между студентами различных стран. Поэтому добро пожаловать, я хочу сказать, студентам Таджикистана, а также и студентам всех других государств.
Еще
Нет.
можно вопрос?
Да, можно.
Во многих школах сейчас закончился учебный год, и многие выпускники затрудняются выбрать профессию. Есть ли у вас рекомендации, какие профессии сейчас актуальны на рынке труда, и как будущему абитуриенту определиться с выбором профессии? Как выбрать свой жизненный путь, который будет в будущем очень важным и полезным для общества?
So today, now it's the summer holiday time for high school students, for example, and today many high school students and high school graduates are struggling with trying to choose the proper profession and proper future career field. So do you have any tips on that? How to succeed and to choose the proper career path and better profession?
Maybe I'm not the right person to give you good advice.
Не лучший советник в этом вопросе.
I can only tell you that I was interested, as I said, from relatively early on in international development, so I chose that career. And the same thing I would probably advise young people today, that is, you have to follow your heart. And, you have to really do what you want to do. But don't necessarily, and that's why it's important to experiment maybe and do different things while you're at university. Don't set your path too soon, because you may still change your mind and you want to be able then to adjust. You have to be adaptable, you have to be resilient from now on. Now, what our future professions are likely to be? I think, as we discussed, in order to succeed, you have to be able to be, there has to be a minimum level that you have to achieve in terms of numerical literacy. But also, you have to be able to communicate well, to get your story across, your narrative. You have to be able to write well. And you have to think in terms of not just yourself, but how do you relate to other people? So people who have already worked in teams, or have done team sports or team whatever, worked in or performed in teams, always already had this exposure.
Мистер Кацу только что сказал, сам лучший советчик в данном вопросе. Могу только сказать, что лично вот для меня я в своего сердца. То есть делать именно то и выбирать именно то, что им самим хочется. Во-вторых, я бы хотела сказать, чтобы они не делали каких-то поспешных решений, потому что сегодня, как я неоднократно упоминал, жизнь меняется очень быстро, и, возможно, придется людям искать новые профессии, переучиваться, обретать какие-то новые навыки. А если говорить в целом о рекомендациях и советах о том, как быть успешным в этой жизни, то среди основных навыков я бы хотела выбрать, я бы обозначил это цифровая грамотность, это коммуникационные навыки, чтобы вы могли рассказать историю своей жизни, это умение писать грамотно, а также умение выстраивать отношения с людьми. Потому что, как я уже говорил, многое сегодня зависит именно от успешной командной работы. И нужно быть хорошим командным игроком.
С точки зрения лучшей управляемости вуза, ваше мнение, руководитель вуза должен быть лицом избираемым или назначаемым?
So regarding the position of the head of the university, do you think that should be an assigned position or an elected one?
I think there are schools of both thoughts. The tendency is increasingly for electing. Well, both selecting as well as electing. Electing means you choose your head almost from within the body, from faculty, and otherwise selecting is if you do a search, executive search, and then you go through a search process and then select somebody. I think the advantage of these processes is you can look at more candidates in depth and then try to see who is the best fit for your institution. When you assign somebody, it's not this fit element is not necessarily well explored.
So you're saying that both options?
Well, assigning is probably therefore in today's world for universities less of an option. But either you do election from within the university or institution, or through a search, executive search.
В принципе, оба варианта сегодня применяются в современной системе высшего образования, да, это elective и selective, да, elective, то есть когда вы выбираете, но, соответственно, речь идет о том, что вы выбираете из определенного числа людей, то есть из определенного академического сообщества, допустим, вуза. И selecting, то есть когда вы ищете, вы отбираете, речь идет о том, что здесь, допустим, предоставляется больше возможностей для поиска большего количества кандидатов, обладающих теми навыками, которые необходимы вашему университету. Но, в принципе, хочу сказать, что, да, сегодня, допустим, назначение, именно принцип назначения в нашей стране происходит гораздо реже по сравнению с выборами. Меняется реже сегодня. Больше нет вопросов? Окей.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Then Siba. Just, okay. Okay, Crystal, so welcome to Nazarbayev University. And let us ask you a few questions about the forum. So the questions number one is about the theme of this forum for this year, which is like future graduates. So in your opinion, how this topic is related to those challenges that higher education system is facing today?
Right. So I think future-ready graduates is a very important topic because, firstly, a lot of graduates whom I see globally are really struggling with confidence levels, asking themselves, like, what is the point of going through university education? How does it really equip me for the wider world after life after graduation? So I think universities are also struggling because we're at the point where for the first time in human history, we don't know what the jobs of the future are. So in a way, we're operating in the blind. If we don't know what the jobs are, how do we as educators train our students and guide them into this brave new future? It's very topical at the moment, and it's not something where there's a clear and easy answer, both from the perspective of the students nor for the educators, but rather I think it's about going on this journey together to understand very deep questions. For example, with AI, with deep learning, with machines and robotics and automation able to do so much of what we've traditionally focused on, the hard skills and the technical skills, what we need to consider as humans is what are we relevant for? What is the meaning of being human? What are the things that separate, the qualities that separate us from the robots and from the machines?
Окей, thank you. План нормальный, да? Видно ее лицо, да? Именно чисто боком?
Нет.
Все хорошо, да?
Не прям боком,
Ну,
средний.
чтобы потом, когда картинка будет у нас, чтобы не было такого, что вообще курумбит не только бражатан, да? Ну все хорошо, окей. Sorry. So question number 2 is, so what kind of solutions today have been discussed at this forum? So to face and to meet these challenges that we've been discussing at this forum.
Yeah, so today at the forum, we heard a lot about various approaches towards preparing universities for the future. what stuck with me from the conversations was there seemed to be a theme where education, or us as educators, we're moving away from just the pure knowledge or the what, because all the what can be found on the internet. It can be found in other areas, it's publicly available. Information is out there. You don't need to go to a university to just get knowledge. But instead, we as educators, we are finding ourselves answering questions like, how? How do we teach? How do we facilitate? How do we mentor? How do we have more of a relationship between ourselves and the students? We're asking ourselves, why? Why? What is the meaning of education? Why should students be passionate and curious about all these different areas? What is each individual student's why? What is the value proposition that a university can bring to education? How can the university really allow the student to connect with what matters to them and facilitate them going on this learning journey? And also we ask ourselves about the who, as in the people that we can connect our students to. Because as we heard from today, it's very important for students to be able to tap into a network, a social network of connections, because oftentimes who you know can make a huge difference in your life, in your jobs, in your careers. One comment from the session that we just heard this afternoon was about the power of the alumni, for example, tapping on the university alumni and using that network to open up avenues of exploration and closer industry collaboration between academics, students, and industry. So I think it really takes a whole ecosystem. That's what I'm hearing. It takes a whole ecosystem to produce future-ready graduates. It's not just senior management, it's not just the educators, it's not just the alumni, but it's everyone working together.
Okay, so could you please also tell about yourself a bit, so the things you're doing and the field you're working at, how it actually does help to reshape the higher education system and to provide the solutions?
So I am the CEO of a consultancy called Forest Wolf, and I travel around the world advising governments, institutions, educational institutions, as well as corporates, how to prepare themselves for the future. Everyone's really coping with this rapid change in the world that we're living in. And I think that where people are looking for the answers in the past hasn't been, the places which we. Sorry, can I start again? Okay, I'm gonna start again. Okay, so I'm the CEO of a consultancy called Forest Wolf. We travel around the world. We advise government bodies, institutions, universities, and corporates how to prepare themselves for the future. What we found is that a lot of people tackle preparing for the future through new systems, policies, procedures, KPIs, but those are external ways of coping with change. What we do is that we focus on internal solutions. For example, future-ready beliefs, mindsets, future-ready culture, because we know that whatever strategies and policies you put in place, ultimately, it's the people's beliefs and the culture of the workplace or the institution that really determines the success of whether it's truly future-ready or whether it's just lip service. So I spend a lot of time working with people, teaching them future-ready skills like awareness, empathy, complex communication, interpersonal skills. But deeper than that, we also work with people to shape their mindsets and to help them overcome their limiting beliefs about themselves. because a lot of times what stands in between someone and the career or the success that they want is their own limiting beliefs. Before anybody's closed the door in their faces, a lot of times people put themselves in the box. They close the doors in their mind and they say, I can't do that, or it's not for me, or I'm not that kind of person. So we really help people, skills, mindsets, limiting beliefs, and companies to make sure that they have the foundations of what it takes to be future ready. And then from that internal perspective, then you can layer on the systems, workflow, policies and procedures, and have a holistic solution for the future.
Sure. So, do you have any projects in Kazakhstan? How are you familiar with the country? I mean, with your first visit, or?
This is my first time in Kazakhstan, so I've never actually experienced the culture before, but it's fascinating how it is this mix of so many different influences. And I'm very struck by how entrepreneurial the students at Nazarbayev University are. They seem to be very outspoken and approachable. They've come up to me to in between the sessions to network or to ask questions, and they're hungry, you know, and they're entrepreneurial minded. So it's been a really pleasant experience being here, and I do hope to have closer collaborations.
Okay. Thank you so much, Crystal.
Thank you.
For your time.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. So dear Susan, so the first question to you is about the theme of this year's forum, which is Future Ready Graduates. So what do you think, what's the relevance of this topic related to the contemporary challenges of higher education system?
I think it's a great theme because it enables us to think not only about the future, and can we know the future, how would we think about the challenges of the future, but actually what's the place of graduates in that, and is it even possible that we can make graduates ready for that future? And if we think that it's possible, then what might being ready look like? And then I think connected to that is, if we then have an answer to that, are our institutions, like higher education institutions, doing some of the work that might enable us to say we have future ready graduates?
So then let's talk about the solutions. So what kind of solutions today been discussed at the forum or globally actually to face these challenges?
One of the things I think is that we don't have one solution. I think if I listened to some of my colleagues speaking, there are different views on what the solutions might be, and indeed even how we think of the importance and the significance of the challenges. So one kind of casting of the challenge, and then solutions follow a little bit, is that what we're facing is a major set of challenges because of science, technology, artificial intelligence, the gig economy, and so on. Some of us actually think that there are other challenges that would also require different solutions. In my intervention today, I talked about things that particularly sociologists and political scientists are quite concerned about, as are economists. We've an ageing population. In some parts of the world, we've got a declining demographic. So there's that part of it, in which it would matter how we want to think about higher education, and even what the areas of expertise might well be. If we've got an ageing population, do we need to better understand gerontology, which is kind of the care of ageing, and so on. Some of us also put on the table some alternatives that included rising social inequalities. So if we also think that's a part of the future, not just this techno-science, is it the case that universities should be, with their graduates, being challenged to think about demographics, ageing populations, rising social inequalities, artificial intelligence, robotics, and all of those things, And if that's the case, then, and my point really, and my intervention was to say, somehow we also need to have a shared set of conversations about the future. Not that we all run down the path and say, okay, it's artificial intelligence and we get ourselves all worried about that. But how can we, from across all of the discipline areas, okay, that we actually have, whether it's from sociology, social welfare, maybe medicine or politics, how do we bring all those people together, or indeed engineering, bring all of those people together and now put them into perhaps interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research projects. So solutions. Some of the doctoral students coming in to study at Cambridge are working across two very different departments with two different supervisors, one in computing and another one in education, and they're actually looking at what they can learn from two differently positioned people. In another case, one is in the medical faculty, the supervisor, and another of the supervisors is in this case, organisational studies. And what they're going to hope to do is walk alongside the student to help them with deep disciplinary knowledges, but actually in an interdisciplinary space that they're working with the doctoral student. Perhaps other solutions that were being talked about, how can universities, be more outward looking? Can they help students develop CVs? Can they have better relationships with industry and so on? And I can actually say in the case of England, that's quite an advanced conversation. Undergraduate students, we're often placing students in industry, and that's quite important often to even have them think you're a desirable place to come and study, because you can put them in industry and they come back. And those industries are very varied. Some of those industries might be abroad, and the student might have to negotiate with, let's say, a company, it may well be an international organisation, a period of time away and then coming back and then engaging in their program and so on. I think that's right to encourage a relationship with the wider industry. So universities are not these little ivory towers and all you do is stay inside that ivory tower. But universities, if they're at their best, I think they challenge students, so that actually they are curious, committed, able to do their best. But what they also do is they encourage students to think that there is a world out there that actually is also a resource, even when they're studying, not just a destination, but actually a relationship to a world out there. Perhaps in my old institution, I was really often overjoyed to see the extent to which students would, as part of their so-called broader student experience, say, I'll sign up for a society and we'll work in the community. One of my students, he painted a house for an old person. Okay? Other students actually worked on a food bank and redistribution of food to the poor, and worked out the startup company to kind of do that. So I think there's lots of solutions that are being talked about, and maybe that's the right thing. There isn't one solution because there are many problems.
I see. Thank you so much. And the last question will be, so you represent here Cambridge University, which is the strategic partner for our Graduate School of Education. So how the collaboration and cooperation between two institutions, let's say, help somehow and to Nazarbayev University to prepare future graduates?
So that's it's been a great privilege, I think, for Cambridge, as for all the partners, to have been involved for 9 to 10 years now. Nazarbayev celebrates its 10th birthday, so it's next year, that's right. So it's now moving closer to the teenage years. And I think what that means is that actually our relationship as a partner will begin to change. How do you work with a teenager? They're finding their feet. They've got to be given independence and so on. So I think in relation to future-ready graduates, it's how do we also share some of our wisdom and experience and maybe swap the tables a little bit, you know. What can we learn from Nazarbayev back the other way that enables us to take a mutual problem and think together about how we resolve that? So if we as the partners can do that, then it seems to me that you're setting up a way of thinking about the role and the purpose of universities. Many universities have partners, you know, quite well-established ones. So it seems to me that Nazarbayev is coming into, you know, a different age. But many of the even very mature partnerships, whether it's University 21, World Universities Network and so on, all of them are often constantly concerned with how to, you know, help undergraduates, how to help graduates think about who they are, where they're going, what the future might look like, if they're thought leaders and so on. So I think it's continuing that conversation with the understanding that the world is changing. So can we together think about what that changed world looks like? I think conferences like this are good spaces also for us to share our different wisdoms with each other. And I must say I'm really pleased that there's quite a significant amount of student participation in the conference, because what that also says is students are a partner in the learning endeavour.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.